Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. So in the video today, we're going to have a quick look at the relationship between Azure Monitor and Serverless 360. So we take a look at a typical diagram of Azure Monitor, and we can see we've got on the left various kind of resources on Azure that can be applications, the platform itself, infrastructure, various kinds of resources that, produce diagnostic and metric data that comes into the Azure Monitor platform. Now, I often find Azure Monitor is quite complicated to understand because there's a few different aspects to it. So you've got things like application insights as sort of part of the Azure Monitor ecosystem, and that feeds data into log analytics, which is where a lot of the logs get stored. You've then got various resources such as a logic app or an app service can stream telemetry data from its diagnostic settings into the log analytics workspaces. You've then got the visualization of the workbooks where you can build a workbook or build a dashboard, or you can even use Power BI to query the log data, and you can query things like some of the metrics and the change feeds, and that can give you ways of visualizing what's going on in this data. And then you've got the ability with things like alerts to configure action groups. So if something happens, you've got the ability to either inform somebody or trigger an event to happen, or you can integrate it with things like a logic app where you can make it trigger an automation to maybe scale something up or scale it down. Now the thing with Azure Monitor, it's such a big powerful platform with a lot of bits to it. It actually takes quite a lot of effort to configure it. And what we tend to find is, you've got the ability for an Azure expert to configure, what resources are going to emit what diagnostic data. And then you've got this really sort of extensive tool set for an Azure expert to be able to use some of that data for deep dive analysis of what's going on. Now, the bit where we find the challenge for people is really up in this area up at the top, where we've got an application support operator who, for many organizations, they wouldn't be experts. They would understand the application domain, but they wouldn't be experts in the low-lying Azure technologies in how to configure and how to use Azure Monitor. So it becomes really challenging for these support operators to be able to do stuff that lets them be productive and supporting your application without a significant amount of like upskilling or support from your Azure experts. So what we want to look at with Serverless 360, the core use case is around democratization of support. So how can we help people who aren't technology experts support an application where they're focusing on the skills they need to support the app and the business context of what the app does without needing a massive sort of training exercise in those low underlying technologies. And that really is where Serverless 360 comes in. So when we install, configure, set up Serverless 360, we're creating an application support view of what the Azure estate looks like. So, you might have 10 different business apps, but they may share bits of certain Azure resources, or they may have their own dedicated resources. And it's kind of like a window on top of not just the Azure resources directly themselves, but you can also have it as a window on top of Azure Monitor to make it easier to configure those application monitoring experiences that help you support your application, as opposed to supporting the kind of underlying infrastructure, which is way more complicated. So it's really, it's about the different roles that people play in that support process. If we think of things like a DBA and a server admin from the on-prem world and the server world versus the application support person, they're the two kind of role equivalents, I guess. So what we're going to have a quick look at is if I go over to my Serverless 360 here. So if we go, let's go and have a look. So have a look at a couple of my demos here. So we take a look at this car appointments demo. Now you'll see that this is a logic app based demo. It's similar for lots of the different types of resources that are available, but you've got options in the resource itself to configure. With Azure Monitor, you can configure things like the diagnostic settings. So I can say, send certain logs to a log analytics workspace, and I can get a whole load of telemetry data coming out, and then I can query those logs. Likewise, I can create alerts for the metrics. So, here we've got the dashboard where we can just look at, how many runs of the logic app have started, and you can see we've got some traffic there for this one. And I can create an alert where I've got, things like I can do an alert based on a metric to go and trigger something. Now, if you think of a customer who's implementing a lot of logic apps, whether it be app services, function apps, whatever, I'm configuring all of these alerts across all of the resources that I deploy, and it just becomes quite a big, complicated effort to set all this up, and you're going to end up repeating a lot of stuff, and you might want, more granular monitoring on certain resources. So what we find is that, you build, develop, and then when it comes to the run, you've got this big exercise to set all this monitoring up, and then you've got this big exercise to teach people how to react to the alerts and what to do with stuff. So what we want to try and do with Serverless 360, if we take a look, here's my application tree. So I've got my application focused view, whereas before I've got all these different resource groups. Some of them have dedicated apps, some of them, like the platform ones down here, they have these these shared resources in them. So let's see, we've got the event API here, so there's some shared functions that might be used by multiple apps. So your physical deployment view is different to the support view. Now over here in serverless, what we can do is if I go into the maintenance department, I can create a car appointments app that's really got the resources that work together, regardless of what resource group they're in, to make this app work. So here I've got a few logic apps and I've got a few API management operations. So I've got, in my API management, I might have 10, 20 APIs that all do different stuff, and they might all have operations within them. But this app uses 2 operations and half a dozen, 4 logic apps there to do its job. And so what I've really done is I've focused on creating that application concept, and I can articulate to the support user using our service map what this would look like. So we've got one one view here of an interface that goes from CRM to the garage, and one that comes back the other way. Now, when it comes to the monitoring, there's a couple of key things here. So we recommend that customers use our monitoring profile. So you'll get one out of the box where you can see there's a whole bunch of pre-configured settings. So if we go and take a look at a logic app, for example, you'll see that we've got the actions fields on by default, the run fail percentage, and there'll be half a dozen alerts that are configured out the box. And what you can do is you can either just take the default profile, or you can create your own custom profile. So here I've created one for API management, for example, where I might say, look, for in general, when I want to add an API to a business app, if I apply this profile, it'll alert based on these 2 metrics. And the idea is when I add lots of APIs, to make it easy to set up the monitoring at scale, rather than having to do every single resource, I can just say use that profile and it'll apply all the time. So an example would be if we go and add some new resources to this app. So we'll just pick a few here. If I go down logic apps, so let's see if I pick these few logic apps here. So they when I set them up the first time, I can set the profile up, but when I add them here, they'll start getting picked up by the default profile. So if we look at the system profile here, and you'll see it'll automatically add these to the system profile, and it'll start monitoring them based on the default metrics. Now I can say things like only add certain logic apps by default, or I can I can have multiple different profiles as well. So I might have the system profile, and then I might add an extra profile here where I'll say, right, give me the API management profile, and I want my APIs to go on that profile, and my logic apps might go on a different one. But what I can do is, rather than having to set up all of these individually, all these logic apps, I can just use the profile to say, most of my logic apps only need the same monitoring over and over again, which makes things a lot easier. But what I can also do is, if you're going to have certain cases where a given logic app might have a different set of monitoring. So for example, this one here, if we take a look, we can see it's got the system profile that's applied to it at the minute, but I might also say, you know what, I want to have this extra metric where I know this one sometimes runs slowly. So I might just say, excuse me, let's say the run latency, I'll add that as an additional metric to this logic app. If I save it, it'll start checking for that metric in addition to anything the profile tells it to pick up. So you can either use a profile, and individual resource monitoring on their own together, or you can just have no profile and you can just do it on a one-by-one basis for a given logic app. So you've got a lot of flexibility, but the intention is, once you've picked which profiles apply to your app, you basically just add resources and it'll automatically start monitoring that resource with the profile that you've chosen, and you won't have to go and set every time you deploy new logic apps, you won't have to keep setting the monitoring up over and over again. It's just the minute you add it to a serverless 360 app, it'll automatically start monitoring it for you, which I think is going to be a big time save for people, and just make it easier. You know where your monitoring's configured, you can see what's going on, and it'll make your monitoring experience easier for those non-experts. And you can configure things like what alerts you want to do, so you wouldn't be setting this up on a per Azure resource basis. You just set it up once for the app. Everything in the app gets monitored together based on its different metrics, and then you'll get alerts sent out at the context of the application as opposed to just the individual resource, which will hopefully make it much easier. Going back to the diagram over here, much easier for this application support user to understand where their problems are, and you can put notes on the resources to tell people what to do if a given metric starts failing. And you can also, one of the quite cool things is you can use things like queries, so we can configure on a serverless 360 app, we can add an app insights or a log analytics, or you can do it with things like functions and API management. You can write a custom query and have it run that query on a regular basis, and then it can drive alerts from that if that query starts going out of the threshold where you consider it to be healthy. So if we have a quick look here, how serverless 360 can use Azure monitoring features. So if we talk about app insights and log analytics, we can use the log data for queries. We can use the log data to build dashboards. So we've got a rich dashboard feature in a business app where you can add custom queries and make it visible in that application concept, which is quite a powerful feature. We can also query the logs using a recurrent query that'll trigger an alert if something's not right. Serverless 360 can use the Azure Metrics API from Azure Monitor, so we can look at metrics that each type of resource have and drive alerts based on breaking thresholds. We've got notification channels, so we can trigger emails, we can trigger alerts to various different things like Teams and DevOps work items and things like that, depending on what kind of notifications you want your support people to get. And then finally, you can build dashboards where you can create richer views of what's going on the app. So maybe I'll take a second to just show an example of that. So here in this car appointments app, you can see I've built a dashboard here where I've made, this one's really using the custom custom metrics. I've said, look, for these 4 logic apps, show me the number of runs. There isn't any failures, and what's the profile over time of when the runs are happening. And let's just change that to be, I don't know, last 7 days by every 12 hours. So it'll show us, a good overview of what's going on there. But what I can also do, if I have a look up in my integration platform level, so I've got a whole bunch of resources here that make up my shared integration platform resources. And here you can see I've got things like my API management, requests. I've got things like my service bus, queue messaging, IO, and I can build other dashboards. So I've got things like, say, my API management. I can build these rich dashboards showing me what's going on. What's the capacity like, which APIs are having which response times. I can create alerts for each API if I want to have different response time SLAs for how they perform and things like that. So I can do quite a lot of advanced scenarios, and it just makes it easy to set this up. And then I can also do things like go in and see on the individual resource itself, what the requests and the capacity is like and that kind of thing. So you can either have a sort of a consolidated dashboard across multiple resources, and there's dashboards at the individual resources, so you've got different views your support people would need. Now, back on the last slide here, so let me jump back over here. So Serverless 360 is about making it easier to set up a great operations experience. That's the key sort of value proposition for Serverless 360. Is we've got in Azure these really powerful, highly complex ways of configuring an application. Serverless 360 sits on top, can point to your resources, point to your Azure Monitor data, and just create that simplified support experience to allow your non-Azure experts to be able to take some of that support burden away and allow your highly experienced Azure people to focus on building new apps, which is where you get the best sort of return on investment from the people in your organization. Thanks for listening today, and take care.